Hello and good evening. My name is Karen Herbert, and I'm here with the League of Women Voters of the Florence area. I wanted to tell you a little bit about the League. We grew out of the suffrage movement way back in 1920 when it was established after the passage of the 19th Amendment, which gave women the right to vote. The purpose of the League is threefold: voter registration, voter education, and voter participation. We're also very active in issues that concern voters, and one of them is the education of our citizens, which is what we're going to talk about tonight. And the League has a rich history as far as this is concerned. In the 1970s, the League worked diligently for the passage of Title IX, and we've also recognized that equality in education and quality are really inseparable. I'm going to read you the South Carolina League position on education. Support of public state-supported education at all levels, which is high quality, effective, equitable, fully funded, and accountable. So that's the League's position. On the local level, we have two leagues, Florence and Darlington, and we have regular meetings, and if you're interested in finding out more about that, you can find us on Facebook or see me after the program. I'd now like to introduce the co-host, Representative Terry Alexander, who's worked with me on this excellent program, and he's going to say a few words. Thank you.
Good afternoon. Should I say good evening? To the rest of you, good evening. Let me thank all of you for being here tonight, and to our panelists, who will be officially introduced by our moderator, Brother Gavin Jackson. Let me thank you all for your presence. It means so much for the people of this state in general, and more importantly to the people of this region, that you've come to make a difference in the lives of our students across this state. So I pray that this will be the first of many dialogues that will come before the people to improve our new involving learning systems. Let me welcome you to the Francis Marion Performing Arts Center. Isn't this a beautiful place for those of you who have not been here yet? It was in 2011, I approached President Carter and others in this community about the state of traditional public education and how would this new learning system that we would look like in the future, and how it would affect those who were and now are part of this new learning system that we now have in place across this state. This new system is reshaping how the children of this state learn, and just as important, how our dedicated teachers teach. Since 2011, when this thought came to me, our learning system, if you will, has changed. There are many components to our system. As I mentioned in one of the press releases, we have the charter schools, both public and private. There are virtual schools, there are private schools, there are home schools, and then there's traditional public education. Now, I'm not opposed to any of those school systems, those learning systems, if you will. They are among us. And it is our charge, that the citizenry here in South Carolina, the administration here, the education, the legislators, and all of us, to see that every child have an opportunity with all of his and her vigor to learn at their own potential. So the challenge before us is, how do we make sure that every child have every opportunity as the next, regardless of what learning system they choose, whether it's traditional, whether it's public, private, charter, whether it's virtual. We need to make sure that every child in any of those systems have that opportunity. So the questions become, how do we manage? How do we navigate the infrastructure, i.e. the technology, the brick and the mortar? How do we manage the financial resources? And most importantly, how do we manage our human resources to ensure that all of our children are prepared to compete with this global economy? That is why we are here. That is what we are going to be discussing. This is what we are talking about, trying to navigate this process, this learning system that is before all of us. And how do we do that? Particularly with the changing of technology, particularly with the changing of how our students learn, and more importantly, how our teachers teach. This is our challenge. This is the challenge for members of this panel here who will be introduced. And they all come from particular areas. And I did that by design, because the areas in which they are representing are the areas that's going to make a difference with our children and our children's children. Again, thanks for coming, and to the panel assembled here, thank you. Now I will turn the remainder of this program, of this symposium, over to my friend, and he's no stranger to Florence. I met Gavin, matter of fact, right down the street here at the Morning News. Mr. Gavin Jackson of South Carolina ETV, he will come and officially introduce our panelists and tell him more about what he have done since he left the PD area. Again, thank you, and we hope you enjoy the evening. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Terry. Thank you, Karen, also, for that introduction. Like Terry said, I am no stranger to the PD. I worked at the Morning News from 2011 to 2015 as a reporter. I covered a variety of topics, including education, before transitioning to covering city and county council, state government as well, which then took me to the Post and Courier, the Columbia Bureau of the Post and Courier, for a year. And then South Carolina ETV came calling, and now I'm on television. Something I didn't think I'd be doing, but I'm glad for it, because South Carolina ETV is a great place, and we do great things, as many of you probably know from our programming across the state and on our radio waves. I am the son of an educator myself. My mother taught children with developmental disabilities for 31 years in the Montgomery County Public School System. That's right outside of Washington, D.C. It's one of the biggest school systems in the country, which we can maybe talk about when we talk about school district consolidation. But it's really good to see educators here today, educators on this panel, and talk about what they do and the core mission of their work, because it is so important, especially in a state like South Carolina, especially in a region like the PD, which we know has its pros and has its cons when it comes to education issues over the past and going forward. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our panel. We have Senator John Matthews. He has represented Senate District 39, which covers parts of Berkeley, Calhoun, Colleton, Dorchester, and Orangeburg counties since 1985. And before that, he served 10 years in the House. He's a businessman and retired elementary school principal, and serves as one of the ranking members of the Senate Education Committee. Senator Matthews, it's good to see you here today. Standing in for Superintendent of Education Molly Spearman, we have Emily Heatwole. She's the Director of Communications and Governmental Affairs for the Department of Education. She previously served as staff for the South Carolina House Ways and Means Committee, and she also staffed several ad hoc committees, including the EFA Study Committee and the School Transportation Study Committee. Emily, thank you for coming up from Columbia. And Dr. Delia Allen is completing her dissertation as part of her doctoral program in Educational Administration and Policy at the University of Georgia. In addition to being a full-time doctoral candidate, she works with the Riley Institute on research related to Montessori education and is a research assistant at the university's J.W. Fannie Institute for Leadership Development. Good to see you here, Doctor. And Scott Price, for 3 years, Scott has served as the South Carolina School Boards Association Executive Director. Before that, he was with the organization for several years, about 17 years, as their lobbyist and general counsel. And then prior to joining the SCSBA, Price was an attorney in private practice in Columbia. So we have a great panel up here with Scott rounding out. Thanks, guys. So we have some questions, and we're going to start right off. We have several, dealing with several variety of topics, but we want to start right off with school financing. Emily, I'm going to jump to you with this question. How do we become fiscally responsible in the state of South Carolina to a degree that all of our schools are functioning at an acceptable and excellent level when it comes to education?
And is this on already?
It sounds good, yeah.
Okay, good. And you all, please excuse me. I'm still getting over one of those lengthy summer colds, and so I may just have a little bit of a coughing spell, so I do apologize for that. When With regard to school finance, I've been involved with school finance for almost 11 years now, I think, after staffing all of the K-12 finance for the House Ways and Means Committee. I did come in post-Act 388, so I came in right after that passed, so I'm very...
Can you elaborate on that, Emily?
Oh, I'm sorry, I should. In 2006, Scott, is that right? Did it pass in 2006? Yes. In 2006, the state passed a law that directed that school districts and counties could no longer tax owner-occupied property for school operating. So owner-occupied property can still be taxed for bonded indebtedness and to pay back anything with regard to that. However, it can no longer be taxed for school operating. Those taxes are levied solely on 6% in other properties. Unfortunately, that went into effect in 2008, which is also the year that the recession began. And so that has absolutely, I believe, compounded a number of issues in districts, both large and small. In our fast-growing districts, some of which that grow now and have grown probably 300+% and grow by what amounts to an entire school every year, they no longer have the ability to tax all of those new 4% homes that have been built within that district that are populating those schools. And so that is causing some significant issues in the fast-growing districts because they can clearly issue bonds and build the schools, but then they need the additional revenue, not just for the operations of the schools, but obviously for increased staffing. The Education and Finance Act, which has been in existence since 1974, is predicated on a relationship between the state and the local's ability to pay, and it does have a mandated match. And when local taxpayers are contributing less to that local match, and especially in districts that are growing in population, it is creating some significant hardships and honestly creating situations where those districts now are having to look for those revenues elsewhere. In smaller districts, in districts that may have a higher number of students in poverty and may have less industry, they will, generally speaking, receive a higher proportion of their funding from the U.S. Department of Education. They often will bring in a little bit less funding in local, and then they'll receive, in some areas, additional funding from the state to even that out. However, when you receive a large portion of your funding from the federal government, it comes with a lot of strings, and therefore you're running into those exact same issues in those districts where they're unable to secure the resources that they need, both for facilities, because their bonding limits are going to be smaller, and also just for general operations. And that runs the gamut from cutting the grass and hiring cafeteria workers to paying teachers and meeting teacher salary requirements, because again, all of those things are predicated at the state level through the construction of that law as a relationship from the state and local. And so I do think we're getting to a point where we're going to have to look at how these things are interacting together and whether or not we have just truly created a situation where we've tied our locals' hands to a point that it's going to fall back to the state even more, or we're going to have to loosen those strings a little bit. Thank you.
Senator Matthews, can you maybe elaborate a little bit about how it could be tied up at the state level?
She's given you the facts, so let me just tell you what I see as the primary problem with that. The first thing you got to know is that 60% of the wealth in this state is located in 14 counties. So if you're located in those 14 counties, you got an option to grow and do some local things. And if you don't live in those counties, then you're in trouble. And the fundamental problem is that students who live in a home with less, live in a community with less, you send them to a school with less, they always will do less. And if you flip that over, take those same kids, put them in a home with more, in a community with more, a school with more, they'll do better. Poor school districts don't have the capacity financially to put the money into the school system as a wealthier district. I'll give you a perfect example. I think the school district down in Hampton County probably got the highest millage in the state, of around 400. I represent one district got about 80 mills. So the local effort is totally different. So that means that the poor school district is putting a greater effort and percentage of their wealth into education, but they don't have any value to get any resources. So until you level that playing field, and we start off with the EFA, we're supposed to kind of level the playing field, but that law has been amended so many times, and so it's really not functioning. My belief is that we just need to start all over with a blank sheet of paper. We've defined what a profile of a student should look like, and then figure out a way to fund it to get to that point. Because different communities require different support. And kids of poverty just require a different kind of approach with additional resources to make it work. But I want to say to you that kids of poverty can learn, will learn, but they probably need more time on task than the other kids. They need highly skilled teachers in front of them and a good administrator. I think we can work it if we do that.
Senator Matthews, just to elaborate on that, how would you like to see that come to fruition? Is it just money in order to get those better teachers, those better classrooms, or is it more than money? Is it getting at the community level and getting at that family level?
Well, it's a little bit more than money because teachers and young people who want to go to a community, they're looking for the amenities that a real poor community cannot provide. Most of these graduates now, they're looking for a suburban kind of life. They want the park, they want used to be the malls, but now since they can go online, but they want the malls, they want the theater, they want the other kind of things that really helps the quality of life. Rural communities will never be able to provide that. And so attracting teachers to those areas is very difficult. Not only attract them, but the ability to keep them. And until we can get highly qualified, highly skilled teachers and motivated in front of those kids, we're going to have problems.
Dr. Allen, do you want to elaborate?
Yeah, I just want to add in, when we're talking about finances and schools and rural districts, it's important for us to keep in mind that we can talk about fiscal responsibility, but until we determine the cost for a school or district to provide or to operate at an acceptable or at excellence levels, we really can't determine that level. And I also believe, I would argue that fiscal responsibility comes in at 3 levels. So we talked a lot about the state level, and that is true, and we know that because the state is, the way that we're funding is sometimes not, well, let me put it this way. Current research have shown that South Carolina has one of the most equitable school funding systems. But if we take a deeper dive into that, and the reason why they say that is because we do provide additional funding for kids of poverty and English language learners. But however, we also provide additional funding for kids in gifted programs and kids in AP and IB programs. And so some would say, so yeah, we see the equity, but then is that really balancing out, right? So I would say also then we have to go to the district level. We also have to be accountable on that level. And I would challenge districts to evaluate for opportunities to improve, to see how you're allocating your resources, right? So looking at distribution patterns, looking at obstacles that you may be creating on the school level with your policies and fiscal procedures, and also considering how you make decisions and how that, particularly if you have multiple schools in your district, how your decisions may impact one high school compared to the other. And I also would challenge, because in the PD area, we do have counties that have multiple districts, that perhaps we should consider consolidating services and human resources before we know how big of the challenge and how political it is to consider consolidating districts. But how about us consider the services, for example, software licensing, textbooks for people who are still purchasing textbooks, to come together to consolidate that. And if we're looking at human resources and opportunity or access to education opportunities, Well, if Florence 1 has a AP calculus teacher and Florence 4 does not, then why can't we look at some way being strategic with that? Because we've been doing that for years with school nurses, consolidating across schools at least. And then move into the school level, because again, I think that we focus a lot on the state, but again, it's tiered. And looking at the school level, we know the inputs, right? We know what the resources that they're receiving, and then we also know the outputs. What the economists call that the education production function. And for you guys who have worked in industry, that's how we find efficiency in production, right? But what we don't know is what's happening in between the process, right? And that's why we see school districts that are similar in demographics, like Florence for Lee County, Dillon, and Marion, similar demographics, but we see a difference in the academic performance. And so you have to ask yourself, well, why is that? And so we have to dig deeper to understand, well, what's happening in between the inputs and the outputs. And my research has shown that if we're looking at just in the PD area, that Florence and Lee and Marion County in 2004, when the South Carolina Supreme Court put down their Abbeville versus South Carolina ruling, was spending relatively the same amount per pupil. However, Florence and Lee were performing below average, where Marion County was performing at average. So again, you have to challenge and ask yourself and be okay to look for those opportunities to say, well, why is that if we're dealing with similar demographics? I don't know, but that's something we should consider. And why is it that Dillon was spending a significant amount less than those two, but still performing at average, right? And so I do think that when we think about fiscal and holistically and not blame avoidance or shifting blame, to say, how can anyone determine fiscal adequacy and sustain that if no one really knows how that money is being spent and if it's being efficiently and effective in the way that we use it?
Mm-hmm. Great, very interesting research perspective right there. And Scott, I wanted to just transition right into school boards. You're the executive director of the South Carolina School Boards Association. You just heard Dr. Allen talking a little bit about the role of how school boards would play in potential consolidation. I think we're getting a little bit into it right now. I didn't really expect to get to consolidation this quick, but since we're talking about it, I mean, and that's it's a topic on everyone's minds, obviously, in this area too, because there are 5 school districts in Florence County. How do you perceive that happening from a school board perspective? Is this easier said than done? Is it a lot more politics at play there? And what is maybe some of the things that you've seen from school districts that have consolidated?
Well, I think it's all of the above. I mean, quite honestly, when you talk about consolidating school districts, a lot of times you're talking about the potential for closing schools. And in some communities, your schools are the basis of that community and at the center of that community. And you have people who've grown up there all their lives, and that's what they know. So you have that emotional side to it. I like what I heard Dr. Allen saying, and I've heard this from the state superintendent, and I've heard this from Senator Matthews and others. We need to look at, first of all, consolidation of services, and I think that's something that certainly we'd be supportive of. There probably are a number of ways that districts can be incentivized to take a look at that, because I think that when you talk about consolidating, you almost have to look at it on a case-by-case basis, because it may not be something that's going to work for a particular area. We looked at a couple years ago, well, more than a couple years ago, the issue of consolidation of 2 districts in the lower part of the state came up, and we worked in having a study conducted on that, and what we found out was, at the end of the day, when you consolidate those districts, it's going to cause a tax increase, which made that legislative delegation close the book on that and walk away from that, and hadn't been talked about since. And that's because you have to do things like you have to equalize salaries. You may have debt in one district that you don't have in another that's got to be assumed. So there are a lot of, you have to look at a whole different bunch of variables when you're talking about consolidation and whether that's going to be the best thing for that community. consolidation of services is yes. I think that's something that, especially with the technology the way it is, I mean, we really do need to do a better job of seeing what we can do out there to be more efficient with sharing of services. But when you're talking about consolidating districts, forcing them together, I just don't think that's the best route to go. I think that has to be something that is generated from the local level because that's where your support's going to be. And so we hope that our position is we support consolidation of school districts when it's something that springs from the local level, is not forced from the top down, because I just don't think you can do that across the board because our districts are so different in South Carolina. And before I leave consolidation, I would like to say that I agree with everybody here on the funding part. We've got to have, that needs to be the next project in South Carolina, is comprehensive education funding reform. We've got to do that. Yes, the system is one that is built on, the equities are there, but as Senator Matthews pointed out, over the years, it's been 3 or 4 decades since we've taken a comprehensive look at our education funding system. A lot of things have changed since then, and a lot of laws on the books have shifted monies around and shifted priorities around. So we need to get back and look at that. We need to tie that into comprehensive tax reform, I believe, also, because to me it goes hand in hand. You look at the millage rates levels you have in South Carolina, and it varies anywhere from 100 mills in some counties to over 300 in others. And talking about holistically looking at it, economic development plays into that. And making sure that we have jobs that are going to these communities that are going to make folks want to come there and be there and live there and be a part of that community and have quality of life. So I think that we need to look at all of those areas, and it needs to be a comprehensive look.
And Scott, speaking of just looking at the next big thing when it comes to revamping education funding, you're around the State House. What do you see as maybe some of the biggest issues to approaching that, to getting that moving forward, in your opinion?
And Emily, you can correct me on this, but there are probably only a handful, including Senator Matthews here, of folks over at the State House that truly understand education funding in South Carolina. So it's daunting. It's difficult. Number one, and number two, number three, I don't think we do a good enough job as public education advocates in being that squeaky wheel. And in South Carolina, and present company excluded, the squeaky wheel generally gets the grease. And educators and folks who support public education have got to do a better job of making some noise about the need to do this in South Carolina. The other part of it, Gavin, would be the cost. Mm-hmm. We put a plan on the table that we probably spent 3 or 4 years putting together. And we had bills filed over the past couple of years. But part of that plan, in order to get all of the school districts on board, we had to ensure them that you will be held harmless. Unfortunately, somebody has to pay for that. So the price tag for that plan was several $100 million. And that, it costs money to make the changes that you need to make, mm-hmm. and it's a commitment. So I think there are a lot of roadblocks there.
And then I'm also guessing when you have issues like SC&G, you have the pension crisis going on at the state level. I mean, it's really hard to get that kind of attention. Maybe Senator Matthews, you can talk about that too, in terms of trying to get that attention for education funding.
If you look at the history of this state, it has never made any major substantial changes without a court order telling them they got to do it. And so unless you create that kind of system, so you got to do this, the General Assembly is never going to volunteer and do it, because you also, in any change, you will have winners and you have losers. And to be honest, the 12, 14 largest counties right now kind of dominate the General Assembly, and they would be the losers.
But didn't we just have a court order, sir, that the Supreme Court, and then?
Well, the Supreme Court has watered that down now and released that suit, so that's no longer pushing it. Mm-hmm. I think one of the things I see now driving some change is the business community recognize that we are not producing a product or a student with sufficient skills to meet their needs in terms of jobs and the skills that jobs are requiring. And so we've got a severe skill deficit in the state. And as soon as we get to a point when we run out of skills, you're going to find that our economy is going to tank unless we provide the skills that kids need to compete in this new job market. And this new job market is changing so fast. You know, manufacturing, I was in the hearing and I thought the average manufacturing wage in this state is around $37,000. The average starting teacher salary is somewhere around $33,000 or $34,000. And those institutions, if you go to any modern manufacturing plant today, it's air conditioned, it's clean, you go home at 5, you don't have to worry about the children, you have to do no homework. And so we are having a shift where young folks are looking at career paths, are looking at, hey, this ain't not bad. And so I think the business community has begun to push that we've got to make some changes.
I just saw, Emily, you writing down a good bit right there. Do you want to share what you've written down?
No, I certainly am taking notes because I want to be able to also share this with the superintendent when I see her. But I agree with what both Scott and Senator Matthews said. I think there's a couple factors in play here. I think one, and actually Dr. Allen, I mean, that's a great point too for schools and districts. Just I'm going to sort of bring it full circle here across all three of these. But I mean, I do think it's incumbent on school districts to look at their spending priorities, because let's just assume for a moment there was never ever any more money. And so just really analyzing those priorities, and I'm not implying at all that they are not doing that or that there are not, but just really looking at those budgets and analyzing them. And, you know, Scott and I have had a lot of conversations about how we can help, you know, ease the pathway for school board members to be engaged and to know which questions to ask. So I do think there's that aspect that you've got to analyze your budget at the granular level, because we could have another recession. We could have any number of financial things that could happen. I think the second piece is that we have not done tons of cumulative reform at all. What we have done to the funding of the state is stacked and stacked and stacked different things on it. And so I do think looking at what is it that we're expecting schools to do and schools to produce. And what Senator Matthews commented on was that the business community is seeing a gap. They're not seeing students coming out of high school who are able to transition to the next step, which we're hoping through the profile we're going to be moving out of that and into students being empowered to transition to that next step, which could be four-year college. It could be two-year college. It could be directly into a company that's going to train them on the spot for a job. But whatever it is, we need to do everything that we can to make sure that they're ready for that next step and to help educate their families on that next step so that they know it's okay if everyone doesn't go to 4-year. That's perfectly fine. If you are going to go to 2-year, go straight to work, whatever it is. And I think to that end, when you look at the funding system, is that what we're focusing our funding on, or are we focusing our funding on what sounded really good that year? And oftentimes, too, when we add those funding lines in, we do it with additional requirements, additional caveats that districts honestly have gotten to the point now that they go, I'm not real sure exactly what it is you want me to focus on. You've given me 75 funding mechanisms and told me to staff this many people here. And so I think there is an opportunity when we look at the funding reform to pull those things back in and tailor them to what our expectations are as a state for our students, and also to help ensure that we can attract very high quality teachers and keep them in the classroom and not overwhelm them with too much.
And Scott, you wanted to chime in on?
I do, and I wanted to play off what Emily said, but also something Senator Matthews said. He talked about the Supreme Court. I think that the court fell short in the Abbeville ruling in terms of directing the legislature. But I will tell you, if you read that ruling, it really does have a pretty good roadmap in there as to where we can make some changes and make some impacts as a state on our education system. And Emily, they spent a lot of time talking about the layering effect that we have in South Carolina, where every year we pass dozens of laws. We passed 14 this year, and we passed dozens of laws that just layer on top of one another. And you just can't, with the governance structures that we have across South Carolina, which was another point that the court made, is we have no uniformity in our state in terms of governance structures. They pointed the fingers at local delegation, local legislative laws that are enacted. So if you look at that court case and the most recent ruling, to me, and it talks about consolidation too. I'll admit that it's in there, but it gives us a lot of things to think about that really make a lot of sense from a structural overhaul standpoint. And it's my hope that the General Assembly would pay attention at least to what the court was saying in that ruling.
Maybe just looking at that Abbeville decision, I mean, can maybe we go one by one on the stage? Do we feel like South Carolina, this region that was affected by that, the 34 districts, do we feel like that we are in better shape now than we were following that decision, or are we in the same place, or where do you think we are right now, Senator Matthews?
I think that we have made a few changes that affect those 34 districts. I think the biggest change we made was probably happened this year, in my opinion. It's something called the Palmetto Promise, is to make sure that those kids, rather than now having an opportunity to do pre-K through 12, now they can go pre-K through 14, meaning they can go to tech free. And we have pilot that project, we pilot that program in Williamsburg County and in Greenwood. And what we found out was when we pilot that free tech, the enrollment for the number of kids who went to tech went up 33%. We anticipate in those rural school districts where this Palmetto Promise will be that we're going to see substantial increasement in kids who are going to tech. And the way it's written, you don't have to go to your local tech. It's portable, which means you can go to any tech you want to go to, anywhere in the state, and major in anything you want to major in. So we think that's going to be a boost for increasing the skill sets, which is going to help a lot. Our original approach on that was, from the Senate side, was that we really want to do free tech for everybody. And that really only costs about $75 million, which in an $8 billion budget is not a whole lot. But in essence, unless we do something substantial, we're not going to get out of it. We're doing patchwork every year with provisos and doing the flavor of the month on issues, but it has to be sustainable. I'm one that I really think we need to do something that we call in the General Assembly, scratch and insert, figure out what we want for our college, our high school kids to know, and design the program and to start over. Because I can tell you, the patchwork that now exists, you cannot enforce it, you cannot grow it, and nobody understands it.
Emily, kind of staying with the Abbeville lawsuit since then, I mean, we have seen some districts in this county as well, and neighboring counties, being taken over by the State Department of Education, and that's in light of the 2014 Abbeville ruling. So do you see us, I mean, in the state education point of view, are we better off? Are we still trying to get to where we need to be? What's your perspective on this?
I do think it's a work in progress. I think we're going to get there. I think it's a long road. I do think that there have been some positive gains since the decision through some of the things that the General Assembly has put into place. I think we need to ensure, though, that there's a sustainable solution. And, you know, with regard to district takeover, as uncomfortable of a topic as it is to discuss consolidation, there were some situations where this agency prior to this administration was not doing what they needed to do to help support those districts. And while it certainly for some has a very negative connotation, some of the takeaways that we have seen, not for us, but for the educators and the personnel in those schools, is there's a lot of great work going on now in professional development where they're able to get together with colleagues and they're able to really dig down, ensure that they know and have all the tools that they need to analyze data, to target their instruction. And at the end of the day, across the board in any district, it doesn't matter what you do with funding, it doesn't matter what you do with consolidation, none of that matters if you can ensure that there's a high quality teacher in that classroom and that you've got stable leadership there. You can move the needle on those things. And so one of the things that does occur through that, and then just in general as an agency that we are being far more proactive about than I know had occurred, at least in the recent history, is helping to provide those resources and professional development to the extent that pick up the phone and call if there's something that you need, and there are ways that we can arrange to try to help those districts and support them, and then pair districts up too. If you've got one district that's really doing a great job, that's when you put all those folks together in a room, and that's your professional development group. And so everyone can learn to work together. And we've gotten some really positive feedback from educators on that. So we've got to keep that going, and that's takeover or no takeover. Those types of opportunities, I think, are going to make a change.
Dr. Allen.
I believe when we discussed the Abbeville ruling, we can't take out the politics that was behind that, right? Because since the 1999 ruling, when they ordered it to go back to the lower courts to Judge Cooper, they had one thing to determine, and that was if they were meeting the minimally adequate education, the opportunity to receive that, right? And that was their judicial interpretation, because that doesn't actually say that in our state constitution. Matter of fact, we don't have a quality clause in our education constitution. So to answer your question, do I think that we moved forward? I believe that we wasted time, because what they released it on, what they released jurisdiction on, was separation of powers. And if you read the opinions and the dissent from the start of, well, from 99, and then from the trial in 2003, 2004, and then from the 2014, they always acknowledge, both the dissenting and the people in favor, they always recognize that there is a separation of powers that exists. And if it wasn't for us getting a new Supreme Court justice, state Supreme Court justice, then the Abbeville case would, I would argue that it would probably still be under jurisdiction, and we would still be trying to hold the General Assembly accountable, regardless how you feel about whether if the Supreme Court overstepped their jurisdiction or not. We have to recognize the politics behind all of a sudden them making a ruling in 2014, and then in 2017 releasing jurisdiction once Judge Few got on, became a justice. And so I will say that, yeah, I'm sure the districts will take the Abbeville bills that the General Assembly has passed, but we also know that a lot of those bills, I did some research on this, but we know that some of those bills are for other districts as well. They benefit them. And we also know, if we break down the actual funding that they allocated towards that it's not much for a lot of the districts, and they recognize that and say that. So have we benefited over the 21, 22, 23 years? Yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on who you ask, right? And some of the justices will say, unfortunately, the courts getting involved wasn't a good thing, because it allowed the General Assembly to sit back and say, well, it's in their court, we're waiting on them before we can before we can do anything.
The General Assembly likes to do that every now and then.
Yeah.
Yes, sir. And I saw you grab your microphone. I'll go before you, Scott.
Let me just, maybe 3 points.
Okay.
I think the Supreme Court decision on minimally defining that we got to provide at least minimally adequate is under the circumstances, because based on our Constitution. Our Constitution simply says you got to provide a free and public education open to all. That just means you got to have a building and everybody can come in free. There are no measurable standards in our Constitution to determine what kind of education we have to deliver. That is where we run into problem when we go to court, because we have no standards in it. I was when that suit was filed and was heard there in Clarendon County, school districts had to have somebody to introduce their case, and so they wound up picking John Matthews. We spent 6 weeks. We rented a house over there in Manning. We spent 6 weeks cramming, prepare for that. I spent the first 6 days on stand to introduce the case. We lost the case because our Constitution says you do not, all they got to do is provide a free public education open to all. That was rooted in our 1895 Constitution that was held in Charleston, that took everything out of the system and it was based on racial problems. And that's why we can't win a court case. And the second thing that happened to us, if you go back and track educational growth, we were doing pretty good up until 2008 and 2009. The Great Recession wiped out a lot of the economic gains, and we are now just beginning to recover.
Scott, want to round that discussion out?
One of the things that that I saw that we passed, I guess, in the last 2 years, Emily helped me, that I thought was very positive, and I think was part that kind of sprang from the Abbeville ruling, and this was the profile of the graduate, because it addressed the layering that we've seen over the years from the legislature, and what this finally says is, and this, I think this ties into what Dr. Allen was saying too, is it's finally a statement from our leadership as to where we want to be. Now the question now, and again, it's called the profile of the 21st century graduate, and it's in statute. And I think the State Department is actually working now on putting standards to what that means. And to me, that's significant because, again, it's a statement of where we want to be as a state. And the question is can we keep ourselves from deviating and meandering and stick to that? And I'm not sure we're there yet. So I do think that was something that was important that I think came from that ruling and was part of there was a series of like 12 bills or maybe less that passed that did something that touched on the ruling. And I think that to me was one of the very significant ones.
Gotcha. And I know it's about 7:15. We're going to try and get some questions from the audience in a little bit. Just want you guys to start thinking about some of those topics you might want to ask, or questions you want to ask. But I want to ask, start off with Dr. Allen again. What do you think is the biggest challenge, I guess, to educational excellence in the PD, and maybe throughout the state of South Carolina, if that's applicable? And how do we find those solutions to fix that problem?
Well, if I'm forced to choose, to choose one, I would have to, again, go back to the fiscal thing, is just not knowing what individual schools need to be successful and the cost of that need, I would have to say would be the single most challenge to educational excellence. And so looking at it in the eye of capacity building, right? Doing what they do, but doing it better, right? In a way, looking at that. So what are they doing, and why are we making these decisions? And like, do we need to keep on doing it, or can we do it better? And then how much will it cost for us to continue doing that? So looking at it like that, and then as far as remedies or solutions to that, states who are facing, because believe it or not, South Carolina isn't the only one tied up in school funding litigation and funding. And a lot of states are looking at hybrid solutions as far as determining this. And one thing is called professional judgment, right? So just getting educators who have been in districts that are working and districts that are not, and determining what specific programs work and how they're spending their money. And then we also have the successful district method that I think is very effective at looking at comparable districts and saying, okay, well, what are they doing? How are they spending their money? You know, how are they seeing this success? And then the other method is an economist perspective, and it's more technical. It's called the cost function, and basically that's taking a statistical analysis of finding the relationship between expenditures and academic success, right? And so those are a hybrid of some of those methods or remedies that we can get to truly say, and again, it's not a one-shoe-fits-all, but to say, how can these schools experience education excellence? And I believe that it's just one school at a time, and then rolling up to a district, and then at that point rolling up to a state, as opposed to, like you said, top-down policies and, oh, try this new reform or try that. And that may not fit for all educators, and specifically not all educators, but all teachers. I mean, but all students. And I also say, how about try asking the students, which I think that we don't do enough. And that really would be my response to a lot of the questions that we would have is ask the students. They know, they're the customers. That's what we do in corporate America, right? We ask our customers, we get feedback, and then we adapt. Why aren't we doing that with our students?
Scott, from the school board perspective, what do you see as maybe the biggest challenge facing educational excellence in the PD in South Carolina?
Well, I'll focus on just the state. And it goes back to what I was saying earlier about we need to have one vision. And we've already talked about the various agencies and entities that are out there that have some sort of impact on education policy development, starting with the governor. You have the legislature, the House, the Senate. You've got the State Department of Education. You have the State Superintendent of Education. You have the State Board of Education. You have the Education Oversight Committee. You have the courts now, and in some instances, you have county councils that have an impact on that because they have the fingers on the budget. So it's easy to see how we got where we are in terms of the layering. So again, it goes back to me, and I'll just talk about mention the profile again because finally we've made a statement of where we want to be, and the question is do we have the leadership and the vision to get us there?
Do you think we do?
Do I think so? I think we have. In all fairness, I think we do have many leaders in South Carolina who have public education as their primary interest. I'm on the stage with one of them right now. A huge champion for public education, Senator Matthews and Representative Alexander. And I think we were very fortunate a few years ago when we elected Molly Spearman to the state superintendent's office, because whether that stays as an elected position or an appointed position is something we'll find out in November. But we've been through some in the past that weren't so focused on public schools. And so we are fortunate to have that. And I think, again, you do have House and Senate leadership. Rita Allison is the House Education Committee Chair. Jay Lucas, strong education supporter. So we've got some people in place that have the best intentions, and I'm just hoping we can get together as one and move forward. How's that for dancing around the question?
Yeah. It's expected, so I'll let it slide. Senator Matthews, go ahead with your
No,
challenge.
I just want to follow on what he said. I think I've seen both the General Assembly, both House and Senate. We're in the best shape in terms of support public education that we've been in a long time, in terms of legislative support. That was not there maybe 10 or 15 years ago. They were in support of, just everything but public education. But I think what's driving that is that the business community and the people recognize if this state is going to be competitive and grow, it is based on how well we educate our citizens and get them ready to compete in this new economy. The second thing I think we have not, as a state, any business that don't reinvent itself in about every 20 years tend to go out of business. When I was in college, the three largest department stores were Woolworth, Crest, and Sears. All of them about gone because they didn't reinvent themselves to meet the new challenges. And the same thing applies to education. We've got to do that. But I can also say to you, I can see a more positive attitude from members of the General Assembly today than I've seen in the past 20 years. And so I think we are better off today than we were 20 years ago or 10 years ago or 5 years ago, because the economy is forcing us to make changes to adopt. If this state is going to be competitive and stay above, we got to educate the general population. And most people now begin to recognize that.
So, sir, if it's not a court order driving our hand, it's the business community.
It's the economy, it's economics, it's survival. And if you don't educate your citizens so that they can compete and become diversified and change jobs and keep up with this new economy, then this state is not going to be competitive. So our competitiveness depends on how well we educate our citizens to get them prepared. So we're better off. We're not where we want to be, not where we ought to be, but we're a little bit better than we were, and I think we're getting better every day.
And from what you've seen, just to follow up on the competitiveness, do you feel like we still have adequate numbers of students, of potential workforce, students going to the workforce or college graduates in the state, or do you think that we're getting to a point where we're going to have to start getting people coming from out of state to come in here and take these jobs? I mean, I'm not guessing that's a popular point of view, but that could be the next thing if we follow that train of thought where we don't have enough people to fill these jobs.
We have a serious deficit. I represent in the Tri-County, which is Charleston, Berkeley, and Dorchester. I represent 2 of those counties. And we're already having skill deficit. And if you go back and talk to realtors, they'll tell you that 55 families are moving in that Tri-County area every day. And they're coming for jobs, and they're bringing skills that we can't, that the market can't find. And so, and it's growing. And it's going to get worse. Because our school system, as it presently constructed, just cannot keep up and provide the skill sets that these new jobs are requiring. And so we're bringing them in. And that's not good for the state in the long run. What we got to focus on indigenous individuals and students and parents and make sure that they are prepared. And if I had to do one thing to improve education, it is the person who's standing in front of the classroom. High qualified and highly motivated teachers is the most efficient way to change the system. And so you got to invest in that.
And if you want to follow up on that, and what you see as the biggest challenge facing schools, I mean, how do we get those teachers like Senator Matthews was talking about? That's always been a concern. Obviously, we saw the budget increase 1% for teacher pay. We did see starting salary teacher pay increase a little bit still, but when you compare it to jobs, I see you got the microphone ready to go. I'm guessing let's defer to the
That's
Senator.
a misnomer. Teacher funding comes from 2 ways. When we did that, when and to be honest, the House had proposed 2%, but they didn't propose to fund it. So they was just talking. They were going to say, how you fund something is important. They were going to send it through the EFA. The EFA would require local districts to match it. We sent it through the EIA, which they don't have to match it. And we increased the base student cost by 50. We start off at $60 per pupil to make sure they had the money to do it. But we also, teachers are entitled to what they call a step increase every year, and that's almost 2%. So when you add the 2% to the 1%, they really got 3% in the check. And that's what matters, not what you call it. It's the amount of money that show up in their checks.
And just to point out, I know that just to get a number for that, but when we talk about 1% teacher pay raise, that's about $31 million right there. And that's, again, tight budget, tight growth. It's not easy to come by.
Let's add to that. The other thing we did, I think that was significant. For the first time, we increased teacher starting salary by $2,000. It is our hope that we're going to do that again next year and the following year till we get it to about $40,000. I think that's where you got to be, 40,000 or better, to attract young kids to the profession.
You're clear.
I was going to check. So the superintendent and I specifically discussed the question that you posed, which is sort of I think it was what we can do, but I'll echo what Scott said, though. You made an excellent point, and she you're welcome, Scott. She specifically said, I know, she specifically said there are too many initiatives, and that and that does not mean me, that means people like the superintendent and Senator Matthews, honestly, the School Boards Association, school districts, the stakeholders in the group, you don't want to run into a system where you're accidentally fighting one another for the exact same resource, and then all of a sudden you don't end up moving the ball forward at all. And so we've got too many initiatives. Let's pick one, pick 2, pick a couple things. If it's teacher salaries, focus on that. If it's changing the funding formula around the profile to match up with what student needs actually are, pick that and focus on it. I cannot remember off the top of my head, but I do keep count. But if you looked at the number of bills that get filed for any number of reasons, so I'm not faulting legislators at all for filing bills because you've got constituents that are calling you and you need to take an action, but the number of bills that get filed and then sometimes the number of bills that get passed, that we spend a lot of energy, to be quite honest with you, at the state level discussing with stakeholders trying to navigate those pieces of legislation. We spend more time on that right now than we're spending talking about. We did talk teacher salary this year, but we're spending a lot of time on that. And so she did suggest that we should all collectively pick a few top priorities, and then you may have to focus on those over multiple years. And I would like to thank and support the senator, though. I truly understand that when you say things like a 1% raise, it doesn't sound like very much. I appreciate that it doesn't sound like much to teachers, and it doesn't sound like much to state employees when they get them, which they have not very recently. But that is, to credit the General Assembly, the third time since the recession they have specifically gone in and increased, outside of the step increase, teacher salaries. They were too low to begin with, so you're not moving up as quickly. But I had to go back and pull, and it costs between $31 and $38 million. And the reason we do it in the EIA is to not create a situation where you may inadvertently put a district in a hardship or create local matches that can't be met, and therefore the salary increase doesn't come to fruition. You do that so it's straight dollar for dollar from the state back to those districts. We know exactly how much it costs. We know how much you're getting your salary increase. And so this is the 6th% on top of all the steps that have gone out. And if we're able to keep that momentum and keep going, we'll be able as a state very quickly to achieve what Senator Matthews is stating, which is a state starting salary of $40,000. Many times you'll have districts that pay above that. And so I do think that we can get there, but again, it's keeping that focus and keeping that momentum and not going, okay, check, we did that last year, let's move on to the new education policy item. And there's a lot of stakeholders in education, and the General Assembly gets a lot of feedback from any number of sources in state and out that they've got to respond to and address and deal with, and it can be overwhelming some years.
Yeah, and we're not even talking about higher education right here. We're just talking about the kids. Senator Matthews, it looks like you have something on your mind.
No,
Oh, you're just holding the microphone? Okay. Well, I wanted to open up for questions from the audience. I think we have a microphone. Representative Alexander, maybe people just want to stand up and ask. Got a question right here off the bat? You could probably, if you want to say your name and your affiliation, or do we have a, here we go. Right over here if you want to go there. Come one, come all.
Thank you. I'm Carol Player, an old school board member. Well, I take that back. I won't use the word old. A former
There we go.
school board member.
Sounds like a politician.
And I'd like to thank first Representative Alexander and the League of Women Voters for putting on such a good panel discussion here. And Senator Matthews, your comments are very insightful on it. The elephant in the room is still what you mentioned at the end, teacher salaries. The state paper ran a wonderful three-series articles on, the title was, Why Are Teachers Leaving the Profession in Droves? Mm-hmm. Now, if that doesn't scare you, Senator Matthews, about what industry is going to do, they're either going to not come back here or they're going to leave because we don't have the people trained. Those articles told us where the problem was. So that's the elephant in the room. I can see all of the wonderful solutions you've got on the board right now and how you can want to get that done. You're not going to get it done unless you've got the best teachers, well-qualified, well-paid teachers in the state. You've got to start at that level, and then you can move on up. And the legislature can't hide behind this court ruling. I mean, that's just not feasible. They ought to have the moral feelings that this state needs higher paid salaries. I recall several years ago that the Southeastern average, South Carolina teachers were meeting the Southeastern average. What happened to that? The other states increased their salaries, which created competition of taking some of our teachers, our graduates out of state. And 1%, as Nancy Pelosi said one time, the teachers are just getting crumbs right now. And we need to move faster. The legislature may say, great, we did 1% this year, and this may equal 3%. So let's worry about other things later. It's priorities. I think if if the lobbyists on some of the big industries can pay those guys well to stay in Columbia and lobby for certain things they need, the financial pie gets divided a little bit differently. Well, I'll ask the question to the panel now.
Yeah.
How can you get thousands of parents, constituents, parents, teachers, everybody's got the interest in education right now. How can you get them organized to just show up in droves or write letters, or not as a school board member, which is an official thing, but as a parent, as a citizen? The business industry is doing a good job now of letting you know how they feel. But I don't think the public's doing a good enough job as constituents to those legislators to really make them feel like, hey, keep this on the front burner and up on the radar screen. So my question is, what is a good process to organize the public so that they can get teacher salaries increased?
And Scott, that's probably directed to you. I mean, we did see those big organized protests across the country. We didn't really see much coming to South Carolina, for example. But what is the solution there? How do teachers get organized? Are they organized already and they just aren't as vocal as maybe some other states?
Well, I think certainly there are some teacher organizations in South Carolina. But what Dr. Player, I think, is talking about, and this is one that again, from my standpoint, we look at certain roles that school board members have, that school boards have, and that's obviously to hire a superintendent, set a budget. They actually work in a judiciary role to some extent. But we've added another piece from our organization standpoint, that's advocacy. That is being open and transparent with your communities, with your parents, letting them know what's going on at the State House, because they get the information from us. They need to share that. They need to report that at their board meetings. They need to be very clear to the public, what the issues are and what they need from the General Assembly. You get some phone calls generated over at the State House, and believe you me, they pay attention to that. And so it comes back to what I said earlier. We need to do a better job of being that squeaky wheel, and that's something that we've been working with our membership on for several years. And to some extent, it's been very good. Forums like this that we work in collaboration with other groups like the League, I think are very important.
Senator Matthews.
Let me just say, I agree with Scott that parents are the greatest potential to change the direction how we fund public education if they would organize and let their voices be heard. And if they don't do that, everybody who runs for office always put education as the #1 issue. But when they get there, they don't vote like that. And I think you got to hold them accountable. If education is the #1 issue, here's what you got to deal with. And parents has that potential to guide and direct the General Assembly. But I can also tell you that I really think we're in the best shape that we've been in the last 20 or 25 years in terms of the General Assembly looking at education, the business community looking at education, because we're running out of skills. So it's a good time to show up. And I can tell you this, we're going to have a good bit of money next year to spend. So be there.
Oh, let's let the cat out of the bag on that one there.
Well, I used to make a statement that whoever you send to Columbia is going to be whatever you get. And so you got to make sure that who you're sending to Columbia support the issues and the children of your community. And if you get that straight, you can hold them accountable. So if you send, well, I don't want to, well.
Yeah, we all know what backyard you're in here. Pat Gibson Highmore, City Councilwoman, former school board member.
Yes, we're talking about recruitment and incentives. But at the same time, what are you doing to recruit more male teachers into our schools? We have very few males, but we have male children who really need that male in their lives because they may not have one at home. They don't want to talk to a female teacher or a female counselor about their problems. What are we doing? What incentives are we doing to recruit more males into the schools?
You're absolutely correct. And how do we get more males in? I think we got to establish more bridge programs. Bridge programs tend to work. Programs like Call Me Mister works very well. I mean, they have good outcome. SC State had a good bridge program that was attracting male teachers, but when we had the Great Recession during 2008 and 2009 wiped all those programs out. We're going to try to reinstate some of these bridge programs that identify specific issues on males, females, minority students in education, because the fact that you may not know the number of people who are now majoring in education in colleges and our university is down 21%. The number of teachers who taught last year but not teaching this year is up almost 22%. And so we can't sustain that. And we found out what works is bridge programs. Identify kids early on, specifically target them and work with them, and I think we'll have a pretty good outcome.
Yeah, not even just teachers, but male counselors also. We just need more males in our public school system. Thank you.
Thanks, Pat.
My name's Ken Cameron. I'm a retired physician. Usually when I come to these public forums, I'm here to make suggestions to tell you how to do your jobs better. But I am embarrassed to say that as a taxpayer and as a physician, I am woefully undereducated, and I need my own remediation. I don't understand the sources of school funding at all. So maybe we can start from the beginning, make it simple. I thought that my millage that is part of my property taxes supported the schools, but you're telling me that it's only for bondedness and for creating schools. So give us a primer. Tell us how schools are funded in any given district. Just make it simple, but just lay it out. What are all the sources of funding that any one community uses to fund their schools?
I was gonna say, if not someone on this stage, can we get a city council or county council person to come up front too?
No, I will. I'm going to try to keep it as simple as possible. There are 3 streams of funding that go into all of our public schools: state money, local money, and federal money. Let's just put federal money over here for the time being because they tell us what we can do with it, how we have to spend it, all of that. So just sort of, and it's about 10%. Just on average for every district, this is true, it's about 10%. And then you've got about, somewhere in the 40–45%. It is actually fairly split when you look at state and local, which with the EFA, which is the original funding formula, it is pupil driven. It is tied to and intended to fund an employee in the school providing a service to a pupil, which is why there are different weightings in it. Occasionally you may hear people mention these, like we provide a weighting for students in poverty or a weighting for gifted and talented. There are weightings for special education. The entire premise behind that, which is not a bad premise, and there are plenty of other states that do it, is the assumption that we're sending you money, school, because you have to have a person to provide that student with a differentiated service. Reduce class size. All of those things are going to, in essence, pay a teacher's salary. Then we have a few other streams of state money, and those go down to districts, and those are generally tied to specific laws that tell both the state and the district what to do with those. And then at the local level, you tax now, and again, this changed in 2006. You tax owner-occupied 4% property for just things that you would see in a school bond. So you're paying back bonded indebtedness there. You're taxing 6% in any other properties, so those are your businesses often. That's what's bearing the brunt of both the bond. They're paying on the bond too, and they're paying school operating. The General Assembly also, in that same act, capped your ability to raise millage in any given year. I believe there are 5 exceptions to that. I've never heard of a district ever operationalizing one of those exceptions, but there are natural disaster, things like that, but there are 5. And so That's how in this state we primarily fund education, and it is that relationship. So it's about 45%, 45%, and then 10 from the feds. But as Senator Matthews pointed out, and I'll pass it over to him, those local abilities vary greatly. And I can tell you, at least the last time I looked, we've got a handful of counties, maybe 2 on the coast, that actually have millage rates that are below 100. Then we have got some counties where you have the citizens who can least afford it, likely, paying really high millage rates, way above 300, trying to make up that local effort. And so that often is what spurs the discussion at the state level about how to equalize that, because you can get a whole lot more money for a piece of property on the coast than you can in, rural Hampton County, unfortunately. And so that's how, in a nutshell, we fund it.
Just to add to that, it's tied back to something we call the index of taxability. That means we have assessed the wealth in every county, every school district. It is the availability of wealth per pupil divided by the formula. So if you have a higher percentage of wealth, you're going to get less from the state, whether you tax that wealth or not. If you have a lower percentage of wealth, under the EFA, we should send you more money. But that whole formula has been diluted over the last 25 years, so it's really meaningless at this point. But that's the intent.
Well, and I would just add to that, and if you look at so much reliance being on the property tax, you're also not talking about the various exemptions that are in place, homestead exemptions that are already out there that reduce that piece of pie. Then you throw on top of that economic development incentives, whether it's the fee in lieu of, which reduces it more, or multi-county industrial park statute, which says that a county can go in there and negotiate away any tax revenue for a school district in order to give an incentive to an industry.
Great. Thanks for your question. Yes.
Hey, good evening.
Skip, before you get there, just so you hear those terms again, county councils has the ability to do something called fee in lieu, which means that if an industry come in and they're supposed to pay X number of dollars, they give them fee in lieu, which means they probably pay half of that, they just pay a fee. And so that also shifts part of that tax obligation. So they're not really taxing the real wealth because you give them something called fee in lieu.
Yeah, and if you want to find out more about that, Florence County Council has a great website. You can look up their agendas. They have all those details, as much as they can reveal for some of those projects, online, and you can, of course, find your county councilman at florencecounty.org. Go ahead, sir, with your question.
Good evening, distinguished panel members, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Pete Robine. I live in Bennettsville, and I came to talk about curriculum, but since the main focus tonight has been about money, I just want to say a couple words about that. 3 things come to mind. First off, you need to spend less money. And the reason you need to spend less money is when you lower the taxes, South Carolina then becomes more attractive to businesses coming into the state. And when business come into the state, they bring jobs. And everything starts with a job. That's number 1. 2, 3 things about reducing the cost of quote-unquote education. 1 is root out corruption. Honest to God, you need to call the FBI into Marlborough County. 2, salaries. I'm all for increasing the salaries of teachers, but you need to lower the salaries of the top tier. It is obscene to see a superintendent of schools making literally 10 times the median pay of its community. Obscene. 3, you need to do things differently. The definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting different results. You need to get this mindset in the other direction. How can you get, and I've heard some very good comments here, but how do you improve the actual education and actually do it much less money? It's not all about money. More money does not necessarily mean better education. And what is the definition of education? Is when someone graduates from a school who actually knows something, right? This is analytics right here. Okay, and I'll tell you what, and I've heard some great comments here, but I gotta say, Dr. Allen, the customers are not the students. The customers are the taxpayers and the parents. We are, yeah, that's, okay, I just make that clear. Yeah, exactly, yeah. But listen, I've heard some great comments out of you and out of everybody here, and Senator Matthews. We need good quality teachers, we really do. And we do need more male teachers, by the way, because that's a very good point. We have a situation, I mean, South Carolina, I moved there from Connecticut in '06, so that makes me a damn Yankee. But I'm amazed and appalled by what I see. I mean, I love it too, don't get me wrong, all right? I love it. I love the countryside, I love the small town thing, but Lord in heaven, we have so many problems here in the state, and they are fixable problems. All these things are fixable. And you have to really put in your thinking cap and say, what are the root causes of the problems?
Okay.
What are the root causes of addiction? What are the root causes of crime, unemployment?
Yeah, and unfortunately, we've seen so much of that in our state, and poverty is such a...
And it's the broken education. And I'll tell you what,
yeah.
you probably are familiar with the NAEP report. That's, for everybody here, that's the National Assessment of Educational Progress. This is a federal report that's released every year. It's commonly known as the Nation's Report Card, NAEP. And it measures math and reading skills in grades 4 and 8. And I got a portion of the NAEP report from the Heritage Foundation, and they customized graphs where they had the national averages on one line and the South Carolina on the lower line. And our averages have taken a downward turn recently.
But to get to your question, I know we have about 10 minutes. We have other people with
Okay,
questions.
but I think there's valuable comments.
Yeah, so did someone want to...
And also, these are valuable comments,
Okay.
and everybody needs to hear them.
Okay.
And I'll tell you what the South Carolina Department of Ed needs to do is take out full-page ads in every newspaper. We want to hear from you. And this is what a beautiful evening, right? What a beautiful venue. But this needs to be done in local town halls, in restaurants, not like this glorious, glamorous evening. It's not about money, it's not about glamour, it's about being serious and focusing on the problems, right? And the number of calls I've made to the Department of Ed, I have an organization called Teach Our Christian Heritage. They don't want it. Don't want it. And the number of times I've called Molly Spearman and the Department of Ed, I've been hung up on, I've been talked rudely to, and the only time I've gotten a letter from the Department of Ed, after all my efforts, is from the legal department.
And now we want to address those questions, but we have limited
Yeah, well,
time.
no,
so-
listen, I'll tell you what, I think the most valuable part here is the
Okay.
time when you get to hear from the people.
Yeah.
Okay,
But-
so we're getting there, right?
Okay.
Okay.
But I have
So it's,
about
it's-
5 minutes left, and I
okay.
want to get these answers
But
to
I
your
think
questions.
you need to hear from the people.
Okay.
Okay.
A couple other people
So-
behind you.
And I'm
Yeah.
going to get off.
Okay.
All right,
Well, we heard your questions, sir. We appreciate your questions. Let's get someone to
regarding-
answer one of
let me
the
say one word
questions
about-
about this.
let
Let's
me
talk
say
about
one word
spending.
about Rico.
Okay.
Let me say one word about it. Thank
Please make it quick.
Our system in South Carolina, it's a disgraceful way we teach American history, which is barely not at all. Schools are way too political.
Can you make a question, sir? Because I can't take any more statements. I need a question. You're asked 3 questions. I'm going to ask the panel now about the funding. Do we have enough money when it comes to...
You need to get creative.
Sir, I got the
and
question.
cut
Thank you. We're going to move on, and we're going to get some answers. So, Emily, do you want to talk about maybe, do we have enough funding? Is it all about money, or is that just...
It certainly is not all about money. And again, I think to the point Dr. Allen made too about making reviewing your spending decisions too at the local level and ensuring again, both at the state level all the way down to the school, are we targeting our funds to the right purposes? Are we targeting them to what's going to impact students? You know, we have limited dollars, although I heard Senator Matthews say we're going to have more this year, perked up at that. But we do have limited dollars. They're limited resources, and I think ensuring that we're not inadvertently watering those down and ensuring that we can unify around some of these priorities to best serve our students.
Get another question from a young lady.
Hey, my name is Allison Green. I'm a teacher here in Florence. I'm pretty new to teaching, but I teach I teach students with profound intellectual disabilities, and I understand that that population is small, and so it's very underrepresented, and a lot of people don't understand them, so they don't understand what they need. But I got my elementary math, my bachelor's in elementary and my master's in severe and profound disabilities. And what I saw this past school year with the curriculum and especially the SC-ALT testing was atrocious. It was completely unacceptable for my kids. Awful.
Can you elaborate on what you mean by that?
Yeah, I can. Most of my students are either blind or visually impaired, and it was a computer assessment where I wheeled them up to a computer. They're nonverbal, and they don't have reliable communication for answering questions. With other things, they can make it known if they're irritated with what's going on right now, they make noise. But they're given a test where they have to answer A, B, C, D. One of the other things, which I don't want to get like too much time, I understand, but one of the other things was a math type question where they read a thermometer. So it's a picture of a thermometer where they have to tell me how much it is, but they're blind. So I talked to my principal, who had no idea how inappropriate it was. She was unaware because she thought, oh, it's from the State Department, and they say it's SC-ALT, so it's supposed to be specifically for that population, but it's not. And then she said, well, you know what, we need to go further than this. So we talked to the people at the district office, and they said, listen, our hands are tied. That goes to the State Department. So then I emailed Molly Spearman, who I'm so disappointed wasn't here because she never responded. And
So your question is just related to how your special needs students can even deal with these tests that they can't even take themselves.
And that's, I mean, that is a problem, but I also want to represent the other people here in red, because it's not just, but it's not just me and my kids. The problem is, and you said the squeaky wheel, like I was very squeaky this past year and ruffled a lot of feathers in Florence 1. But then, I ended up spending $1,500 out of my own pocket just to get my classroom started. And that's just not acceptable. Mm-hmm. The money that y'all have talked about that is potentially coming our way, like I'm not really holding my breath right now until, I need to see it. Once it hits my account, then I'll be a little bit better. But I don't understand, like, how much squeaking do we need to do? And what do we need to do to actually get these things heard? Y'all talked about we need to have appropriate teachers in the classroom. I'm educated, and I know what my kids need. But it's not making any difference because the people that are making those decisions don't listen to us.
Do you want to address that from the state level, Emily, when it comes to curriculum and special needs?
Absolutely, I'd be happy to. First of all, I need to get with you. What did you say your name was?
Allison Green.
Good, I did write it down correctly. I need to get with you. One, I want to get your email answer, but the second piece is we actually need to have a discussion about what you just identified, because there are accommodations both for students with special needs. Hold on, from our perspective, you've now indicated to me there is an actual issue that I don't know that was actually elevated to our Office of Special Education Services. That would be a violation of both state and federal law if a blind student was given a test that he or she can't read. So that is not an issue that would be ignored. With regard to testing, I'm going to try to say this very delicately, and please also remember this is Emily talking, but the superintendent has talked a lot about reducing testing. I've started at the department in January of 2015, and I've now gone through 2 rounds of legislation at the state level changing tests. Not because we, the department, asked, not because you all asked, but because, or the districts, and to be quite honest with you, not because all of the members said, boy, this seems like a good idea, but there are other interests involved to try to get these markers, these measures at the state level. And I'm not going to say it is all bad, because to be quite honest with you, if you've got students that cannot score well enough on certain tests, and I'm not saying you need to over-test them, but they're getting A's in class, you do have a problem there if you can't come out of the bottom level of SC Ready or SC Pass, but you got an A in your class, that's an issue, so you can identify some things there. But we are mandated by state law, and I'm not trying to pass the buck because we fought it. I've been yelled at, I've been called, I mean, Scott has too. I mean, we spent a lot of time fighting that, so did the groups representing educators, and we got a compromise that it didn't feel much like a compromise, but it was. And anytime we mandate a test at the state level, federal IDEA law says that we have to produce it for all children with disabilities, and I am certain that there's no possible way to produce a standardized test in a manner that would be appropriate for every child with every ability or disability. I fully understand that. That being said, when they say it's us, no one at the agency can call you up or send something to your district going, disregard the law. We can't do it. Your district can't look at you and say, disregard the law. And that's the unfortunate thing. Our hands do become tied there. I do think that there are some considerations, and we do need to have a further discussion, and I don't want to belabor this, but moving forward about what assessment looks like in this state and what will be best to give us measures both to improve and actually give some valuable information back to teachers. But Allison, I would like to get with you before you leave, if I could, just to get your contact information and be sure that we get in touch with you tomorrow.
And I know we had 2 more people stay in line. I know we're getting pretty close right now, but if you guys can make your questions very quick and to the point, we'd really appreciate it. Go ahead, sir.
Okay. My name is Darryl McFadden. I'm a parent and citizen of Florence County School District 4. And Ms. Allen, just quickly on this, you're right. We need to find out what students want, because one thing, them reading does not help their skills hand on hand, because you can read, you can understand, but if you have never done it with your hands, well, how successful or prosperity are you going to see from the student? And we do need men more, because a lot of meetings, I'm the only man there, parent there. But the question is, since you're saying finance, growing up and raised here, Florence 4 has lost a lot of funds, because you go down Highway 76, Ebenezer Road, growing up a little in the 70s, 80s, that was Florence County School District 4. And you go also further down to the right up Interstate 20 to the first exit off of 95, address there was Florence County School District 4. And those funds were taken where students had to be transferred to Darlington County and Florence District 1. Now, do you feel that made a big difference of Timorsville District 4, of losing a lot of funds? Because the businesses there, those funds, District 1. And as time went on, we also lost our career center, because in the 80s, me and my older brothers, we had that. But now we no longer have that. They're saying, no, we do not have the funds. Now the state has came and taken over. What do you think we need to work, and what plans do you have? And also consolidation, because since District 1 has taken a lot away, do you think the consolidation should be with District 1 or others? What plans do you have?
I don't know. Yeah, I don't know how specifically we can get to or speak for Florence school districts in this meeting, but maybe Senator Matthews, you are overseeing. You're part of the Orangeburg County School District consolidations going on there. Can you talk a little bit about how that process works and the experience that you all are going through right now, how that works in general for people that don't know how that process goes?
Look,
you good?
Consolidation can be a difficult problem. It's not easy moving people, but in some cases it is necessary, but you've got to have the will of the leadership to get that done. If that will is not there, it's not going to get done. And consolidation in all cases is not the answer, but in some cases it could be more efficient. And efficiency save revenue that can be used otherwise. And so I'm a big fan. If the more efficient you are, the better your outcomes can be, because you free up revenue to do more things that you could do within the same system without raising taxes. And so, but it's the leadership has to make that decision. Your local delegation make that decision, not the State Department of Education, not the state board, your local delegation. That's who you need to talk to.
Kevin, if I may, I I think one of your other questions though too was specifically what we're going to do. So we are going to we're going to help you all partner though across some district lines. It's not a formal consolidation. It's partnering across district lines to try to expand some of the opportunities for the exact reason that you just referenced, which is the career centers closed. And so I would be happy to, and I'm happy to grab you after the meeting, get your contact information and send you those specifics so we don't take up too much time here, but I'm happy to do that.
Yeah, because we had 1,400 students, 99, now we have only 6.
And ma'am, really quickly with your question as well.
I will wrap it up there. My name is Sherry East, and I'm a high school science teacher from Rock Hill, South Carolina.
Oh, thanks for
And
joining.
I am the new president of one of the teacher associations you mentioned called the SCEA, where we have been hearing from many, many teachers, not just about the pay, but the working conditions in the classroom. So some districts don't give the step increase you were talking about. I went backwards on pay last year because I'm done with steps. I'm 27 years in. I'm done unless the General Assembly decides to give some money our way. So that's one point, is to please look at, instead of throwing it all at the beginning, to even it out for all of us that are still in the classroom. Because there's many seasoned teachers that are almost at my pay, because that's what we've done for years, is throw it at the beginning because we want to entice the young ones in, but we're doing nothing to keep the rest of us with our conditions. The second point is about the policies and the testing, and the profile of the high school graduate's beautiful. But it's not what we in the classroom are focusing on, because we've been focused on testing and our test scores. So it's like we're talking out of both sides of our mouth. We want this for industry, but we want you to do this. And so why do you have a kid that has an A that can't pass a reading test? Because we can't fail anybody. Because we don't want that on a report card. So what we've done for years in education, through no fault of anybody except, we'll blame somebody, I'll blame the federal government, DC, is this accountability piece that was placed on districts and placed on principals, then rolled down to the teacher, is that you can't fail anyone because we'll look bad on a report card. So therefore, you have to give them a 40, Sherry, when they do nothing. And you have to give them a 60. So, and the kids figure that out, y'all. They know. But then when they get to the workforce and on the job, they're expected to do 100% to get paid, but they're used to doing nothing and getting a 40. So this culture of the do-over kids and the do-over society, you don't have to come to school because we got makeup school on Saturday. You don't have to do your work because I know she's going to give me a 40 and let me do everything over. That has to stop if you want these skilled workers, college-ready kids. A lady at Winthrop told me a little girl came to her door and knocked and said, "I'm ready to take my retest." And the professor said, "What are you talking about?" And she said, "Well, I wasn't ready last week, and we always get to take our test over."
Great. So I see Dr. Allen nodding along, and I feel like I want to hear her comments.
Like, you don't
from this
even
too.
have to answer any of that,
Yeah.
but those are issues that are out there for educators across this state and nation that have to be dealt with here at home.
I'll be real quick. I would just say I agree. I went into the classroom. I taught high school math for 5 years prior to going to get my PhD in policy. And for the issues that you educators brought up is the reason why I decided to get my PhD in policy, because I do believe that we need people who've experienced this and seen the challenges from a teacher's perspective and the student's perspective to be able to be an advocate for these issues, as opposed to it kind of being, it's their problem, because these are real issues that educators experience. And so I commend you guys for fighting and continue to, and just know that in the state of South Carolina, I'm here now, and so you do have a fellow educator who does have a seat at the table now that can help you guys advocate for some of these policies that don't make sense and doesn't move us forward with educating our kids and helping you guys do your job and be successful at it. So.
I think it's pretty safe to say that we could keep going on and on, but it is getting late, and I want to thank all of our panelists who came out tonight to discuss this. We had a great conversation about education. And for everyone that was here, and maybe some of your friends or your coworkers or colleagues that were not here, SCETV, we did record this entire symposium, so it will be available on SCETV's YouTube page tomorrow. You can share it, you can comment on it, because we will continue to talk about this going forward, especially on This Week in South Carolina, which is a show that I host every Friday night on ETV at 7:30. And Superintendent Molly Spearman's been on that show before. She should be coming on pretty soon this fall. And we also talk with other senators, other lawmakers, and newsmakers about the issues facing you. So be sure to check out This Week in South Carolina every Friday night, 7:30 on ETV. I want to thank you all again, and we will keep this conversation going with Representative Delia Alexander and the Florence League of Women Voters. Thank you.
Thank you, Gavin, and let me thank all of you for coming out and sharing with us this evening as well. Let me kind of clear one thing for those of you who are PhD candidates or have gone through a PhD program. It was mentioned earlier, and it's my mistake coming from my office, but Dr. Allen is not a candidate for the PhD program. She is a PhD person. And just for your information, her dissertation, and that's why I wanted her here, her dissertation, which is situated at the intersection of law, finance, and politics, is titled From Briggs versus Elliott to Abbeville versus South Carolina, a legal historical analysis of school funding litigation in South Carolina. That's a mouthful. But I wanted to share that with her because those of you who've gone through the PhD program know how hard it was. And I wanted to give her her props, so we want to thank her for coming. And Emily, thank you so very much for sitting in for our superintendent. I received information on yesterday that we want to keep her in our prayers, that her father's been ill. She's like 92 years old. He's having some surgery. And like any child of good sense would want to be with their parent. So our superintendent is not here because of her father's illness, and we want to keep both she and her father in our prayers. We've heard a lot tonight, and we're really just scratching the surface. And those of you who are in education, or those of you who are concerned about education, realize that it's more than just students coming into the classroom and teachers teaching. It's about funding, it's about laws, it's about involvement, it's about business, it's about education, it's about taxes. So it's like a big octopus running around out there, and we're trying to grab it and move that octopus in one direction. So we need to continue this conversation when it comes to public education. And we didn't talk about charter school, we didn't talk about virtual schools, and all of those pieces are tying into this whole financial network to fund our schools. But there's a direct correlation, and I'm glad someone mentioned it. There's a direct correlation between education and economics. There's a direct correlation between education and economics. And where you find those school districts does not have the tax base, you'll find a low-performing school. And it affects all of us. And if we want this state to move forward, if we're serious about moving this state forward, then we should be serious about educating every child in this state. An educated state is a healthy state. So we're going to be having these discussions on, and we're going to continue to have these discussions. Now, I have my staff person from Columbia, Ms. Connie. She's in the back there. And if you're really interested in continuing a dialogue, we can't figure it out in one sitting, not even two sittings. It's a continuous process because education is evolving. It's interesting, Dr. Allen, you said, ask the children. Who would have thought of that 20 years ago, asking a kid how we should do this for you? But then it makes sense when you think about it, unless we don't trust these kids. So those are some of the things that we have to start processing in terms of how we educate our children, how we fund our education, how we train our teachers, how we pay our teachers. And it costs. No taxes, no dollars. It costs. If you're talking about cutting taxes, remember you're cutting services. You're talking about lowering taxes, remember you are lowering services. That's really the only income generator this state got. are taxes. Well, the lottery, but that goes to higher ed. But taxes, that's the only income generator we got. So if you start cutting those, then you start cutting services, teachers' pay, educational buildings, and the like. Anyway, let me get off my soapbox. Thank you all very much for coming. But if you want to sign up and stay in touch with me, we're going to be formulating a coalition here in this community. If you want to sign up, see Ms. Connie. Where's Ms. Connie? She's in the back there. We just need your name, your school district, and your email address. Again, thank you all very much. Thank our panelists for being here, and we appreciate it. Let's give them another round of applause, if you will.